Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you all for joining our fireside chat today here at Smarttech. Our topic today is going to be, are you doing enough to protect your organization through next generation firewalls? Which, as you can imagine, is a huge discussion point recently with the workforce moving to a more working from home model. So today we're joined by Dan Griffin, a senior engineer from Palo Alto. So welcome, Dan. Thanks very much for joining.
Hi, Mel. Thanks for having me.
So what I'll do very quickly is obviously, for those of you who don't know, so Palo Alto obviously are they're one of the world's leaders in cybersecurity, next generation firewalls, and cloud-based solutions. So what I'll do is I'll get Dan to give a quick introduction to himself and what he does at Palo Alto, and then we'll kick into some topics.
Thanks, Melanie. So my name's Dan Griffin. I've been with Palo Alto Networks ever since we set up an office here in Ireland about 5 years ago now. So we're still fairly new in Ireland. But Palo Alto Networks as a product has been resold by our resellers and distributors in Ireland for way longer than that. So as a company, we're still seen as kind of the new company on the block, but I think that's changing. I mean, we've been around for near on 15 years now, but myself, I've kind of been in the industry since I was 19 years of age, which I'd like to say is 20 years ago, but it's a bit longer now, unfortunately. So I kind of started off as a programmer writing. Well, I aspired to write computer games, but I actually ended up programming for the year 2000, right? So a lot of COBOL programming at a university, and from there I kind of got an interest in networking, but not kind of the ins and outs of networking, more around the Microsoft and the Novell side of networking. That kind of led to me into a place where I was doing a lot of Novell to Microsoft migrations. A lot of organizations were starting to adopt the internet, and I very quickly became like the email guy. Like that's what people used to call me, was the email guy, right? So kind of part of being the email guy was that you had responsibility for the perimeter of people's networks. And so through that, I ended up kind of looking at security for people. And it was kind of piecemeal, you know. I went on to work for a web development and computer training company, whereby we started hosting websites for people. Websites were the new thing to have, right? And e-commerce platforms. And so I got into the security industry that way. From there, I moved and I worked for a security reseller called Entropy, who are long since gone. But I worked there for 5 or 6 years, kind of really tailoring my craft and you know, rising through the ranks of that organization. One of my last jobs before I left Entropy was around vendor management, so tactical vendor evaluation. And I obviously did quite well because one of the vendors plucked me from that company, and I went to work for a company called Armport, who specialized in email and web security. Armport was then acquired by Cisco, and so I worked in Cisco for 7 years. Again, climbing the ranks from acquisition all the way up to technical marketing engineer within Cisco. I had a bit of a global role to it, so I was kind of on the road 3 out of 4 weeks of the year, dotting myself all around EMEA as well as the UAE. But then we started a family, so I came back to Ireland. I headed up a reboot of F5 in Ireland, and I was plucked from F5 by Palo Alto Networks when they wanted to start the business. They needed a tactical guy, so I became that tactical guy. And so that's me in a nutshell. I've been kind of doing security in one form or another for a long time. At Palo Alto Networks, the role changes, right? So I've kind of done everything from being on site with customers, installing proof of value or proof of concept. So everything we do, we always ask the customer to put us up against whoever they have or whoever they're considering in a fight off, a bake off, right? So let us all prove that we can do what we say we can do. And that gets you fairly close to the customer as well, which is a really nice thing, you know. So I do that, but I do things like this, right? So where we come on, we have a little chat about technology and see if we can scratch a couple of itches for people, maybe answer some questions a bit candidly. And moreover, since COVID happened, I think a lot of the technical folks in Palo Alto Networks have been kind of redistributed, right? So we have our day job, which is kind of looking after our customers and partners and making sure that we're keeping them abreast of the latest and greatest technology. helping them, with the challenges around COVID, right? So we've had a few freebies out to customers to help them enable a mobile workforce. But because of those freebies out to customers, like Palo Alto Networks doesn't have enough professional services engineers to deliver that. So a lot of BSEs have been tasked with delivering kind of full-blown remote access solutions for the smallest through to the very largest customers for free, as a gesture of goodwill, right? So we're part of the cyber industry. We understand that businesses have challenges, and we want to help them through those challenges with a view to maybe them listening to us in the future, whereby they mightn't have taken a meeting with us before. So that's me in a nutshell. So.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. I think what we'll do, just for, I suppose, a brief kind of structure for those of you who have joined us. So what we'll do is we'll kick into some questions. There is a chat section over on the right of your screen. If you do have any questions throughout, please just pop them in there, and we can see if we can get to them today. And also we'll have some polls that'll pop up every now and again, just if you want to have a look at them. So what we'll do, Dan, is we'll go straight into it. So I suppose the biggest question we'll get into the big one is COVID, right? So since COVID, I suppose, in your own opinion, I suppose, what do you think has changed, I suppose, in the threat surface, excuse me, with the sudden kind of working from home, kind of remote accessing, things like that? Have you seen a change there?
We have, and I suppose there's probably multiple parts to that question, or maybe multiple parts to the answer. I mean, so and we were kind of talking about this before the call started, right? So obviously the attack surface has grown, right? And where organizations would have traditionally placed, the walls of their organization, deperimeterization has been happening for a long time, but I think at this kind of scale, we haven't seen it, right? Everyone is working from home pretty much, right? So I suppose the threats to organizations are and the security of those organizations now are disseminated down onto home networks, right? So my home network or my neighbor's home network or whoever's home network, and the strength of that, right? So and the devices that exist within that, and how we're enabling those remote access workers, right? And so that's one thing, right? So and that's a big challenge for organizations, the security of that. But another challenge that we've seen is just giving people the access and having especially for larger organizations, having the perimeter of your network be sufficiently big in order to address what would have been, network-based traffic, but is now remote access traffic, and that being encrypted and decrypted by a device that was never really designed to do that at scale for those organizations. And so that's led to different ways of enabling the business. And we've seen, personally, I've been involved in the large-scale remote access projects, but I've also been involved in massive data center overhauls, right? So the traditional kind of MPLS network for larger networks, that, a lot of organizations have said, well, why are we spending all this money on an MPLS network when no one's in here? Everyone's outside, right? So MPLS is starting to disintegrate before our very own eyes, and there's been a lot of SD-WAN projects of recent. But data center overhauls, right? So you would have an MPLS network, lots of offices all connected into a data center to access applications and services within that data center, and then some of that traffic going to the internet. But we've seen that kind of flipped on its head now, where that smaller internet pipe needs to be bigger, which involves customers upgrading all their perimeter-based security that would have been, not needed because users were in their network or in the zone of trust, right? Some organizations moved away from this, everything inside my network is trusted, a long time ago, but a lot haven't, right? It's not a cheap thing to do, right? So there's some of the shifts, and so they've led to other things, right? So there's been a huge adoption in cloud, right? So PaaS, not so much fast, but fast is coming. So platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, right? So folks taking an application that would have been deployed on-prem, which they either can't scale to meet that, or it's a business critical application, and then taking that application and shifting it into a cloud, right? So one of their clouds. And so doing so, access to the application is the lifeblood of the organization. So quite often access becomes more important than security, right? So being able to bill our customers, being able to make sure that those invoices are still flowing and there's money coming back into the organization, like that takes priority over making sure that that's secured, right? A lot of organizations would say, I don't like, security is going to slow this down, so I'll do security later. I need to keep the business running, otherwise no one will have a job, right? So we saw a shift in access being way more important than security. People looking to add security later, and then in some organizations, it came down to the who was doing this, right? So quite often the network team was tasked with doing it, and with the server team, and they would do a lift and shift with the assurances from cloud security or from cloud providers that the cloud is inherently more secure, which is true, but it still needs to be switched on, right? Security is always something that has to be switched on. So it's inherently more secure from a DOS perspective, but it can still be configured to be wide open. So there's been a number of changes from a business perspective, and then from an attacker perspective, we've seen the attacker shift towards different industries for better success. And again, kind of something we talked about briefly the other day was pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of attention on pharma at the moment in order to from both the attackers, from everyone, right? Everyone wants a cure, and so the adversary has shifted their focus towards pharma, with the view to that particular pharma that they might have access to becoming the people with the cure, and then either holding that cure to ransom, or distributing that cure for free on the internet, right? A hacktivist type thing. We shouldn't be paying for this. It's 7 billion people, blah blah blah, or selling it to other pharmaceutical organizations, right? So the good old let's make a bit of money off this, which is what most hacking is involved in. So I think I've answered some of those points, but then there's others, like the type of attack. I think if we look at the most prevalent attacks, or the biggest attacks this year in 2020, which has been the year of COVID, right? I think phishing is by far one of the biggest, and I think you've seen that inside in your own SOC, Mel, right? So you've had a lot of reports from that.
Yeah.
As well as I think you're saying that invoice fraud is a huge one that you see a lot of your customers kind of coming up against.
Yeah, invoice redirection, I think, is a large one, and I think we spoke about this previously as well, and I think everybody's talking about it at the moment. But there is a substantial rise in that kind of the kind of simple phishing email that would be a CEO emailing in to kind of say, oh, this invoice needs to be paid, or else type thing. But now, unfortunately, the rise is huge because people can't go and ask the person in accounts if it was them, or they don't want to be ringing people. You know what I mean? Like we're kind of like, we're a culture of like, when you work, you work as much as you can, and you kind of do as much as you can for your company. And I think there is a little bit of, when people kind of went to the working from home model that hadn't been used to that, of course, and I've gotten them myself. I've gotten the emails of, apparently from my managing director saying that she's given me access to some Dropbox folder and I need to click on it. And, I think there definitely has been a rise. We've seen it in our customers, and I think you've obviously seen it in yours. And I mean, from, having kind of cybersecurity incidents happen in companies can be as easy as phishing. It could be, unfortunately, it could be ransomware, things like that. We just threw out a poll, and it is literally split down the center for the three. Oh, no, never mind. Somebody just answered. So I think, a lot of people wouldn't be sure whether or not. It depends, obviously, where you are in your organization, whether you do know if you have had these. But I'd say nearly everybody has had a phishing email, I'd say, in the last couple of months for sure. I suppose from that perspective, even, we obviously have, like, as you mentioned, you have your, in-house kind of, topology where you're looking at what, where you're going to put your money in your network. And now you have this working from home, right? So you have your kind of traditional security measures that you had in place. Like, do you see companies making like a kind of vast difference? Do you see them changing how they're working a lot, or is it just in the infrastructure kind of thing that you've been seeing so far?
Well, so we see people looking at what they would have done previously. So things like disaster recovery, all of a sudden, pandemic has become the thing that you need to plan for, right? And so it's kind of worst case scenario. So and some organizations they can't or haven't or find it hard to remove to like an always connected agent deployed on their laptops. And some organizations just can't, they don't have the ability, they don't have, when you decentralize all your endpoints at scale quickly, it becomes very, very hard for you to retain some sort of management of that endpoint. And so now things like, if I want to understand if a particular binary is running across my entire endpoint estate, I can no longer probe them on my network because they're not on my network, right?
Yeah.
And I may not be able to probe them over VPN because that VPN might be a manual VPN that they switch that on to access something in my data center. And when they're not using that thing in the data center, they might switch it off. And so we're seeing businesses now saying, well, look, we need to move to a kind of an always connected infrastructure. And so we're seeing, there's one organization that's talking with them, and they knee-jerk bought like 12,000 laptops, and part of what they were buying was, don't send them to us because, well, no one will be in our office to distribute them. We need you to send them directly to,
Wow.
here's all the users, and we need you to use your scale to do that. And so the supplier of the laptop was like, well, let me see how much that will cost.
Yeah, exactly.
And they could name their price, right? Because it had to be done to keep the business running. And so subsequently then we worked with them to use a carrot as opposed to a stick in order to get the tools that they needed deployed. So endpoint security tool, endpoint analysis tool, VPN agents and stuff like that. So we worked with them through, once they kind of got remote access tools, we were able to inspect kind of the endpoint in order to make sure that the other tools are on there. Yeah. And if the other tools weren't on there, through hit profiling is what we call it, where we inspect the endpoint, we would limit their access to things. Right, so we'd limit their access, we'd splash them and say, hey, you just need to go to this team site or this website and pull this agent. And once you do that, now we can control your asset and you can have access to everything, right? You can do your job and stuff like that. So we kind of used a bit of a carrot. We said, if you play ball and install the software on your PC, we'll give you all the access that you need.
Yeah. And what I suppose, like, going from like, we've seen a massive increase, I suppose, in like application kind of traffic and things like that. And like, do you think, like, if a company is thinking about either they have a firewall or they're thinking about upgrading or changing their firewall, do you think having a next gen firewall in place is going to give you better visibility, better security at that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the answer is yes, obviously, but like, I suppose maybe what do you think, like, if they are looking into it, like, what are the biggest benefits that you can see, like, right off the bat? What's the biggest thing that they'll see a change in?
So there's kind of two, and it depends on what part of an organization I'm talking to. So certainly with our next generation firewall, what we look to do is we look to consolidate multiple services into a single unit where you can actually switch on all those services, right? So it's not just about having the services, it's about being able to turn them on and actually process traffic through all those services. And so we have a patented way of doing that that's very good. But so moreover, the second part or the second benefit of a next generation firewall, even if you're not kind of enlisting all the services, if you don't have this massively stringent policy, is what you're going to want to get from it is you want all logging all the time with full contextual information, right? And so one of the major differences between a legacy firewall or a layer 3, layer 4 firewall and a next generation firewall, or is the contextual information that exists within that, right? So even if you're not executing policy, just being able to contextualize the traffic pattern, right? So, an awful lot of applications are over port 80 and 443, and we don't. And if you look at a layer 4 firewall, quite often the policy is based around source IPs, destination IPs, and ports. Mm-hmm. So quite often you'll see that there's a lot of ports open, and those ports don't offer you any kind of contextual information around what an application is. I mean, so a lot of people will go a little bit technical. If you say port 25, TCP port 25 to a lot of people, they go, oh, that's email. But it doesn't have to be. It can be a reverse SSH tunnel into your organization exfiltrating data. And so if you make the assumption that that's just email, I mean, you're not in a good place, right? So from our perspective, when we talk about next generation firewall, and there's many form factors, right? There's physical and there's virtual, there's cloud delivered. We even have one that runs as a container now. And when we talk about application, we don't just talk about doing, differentiating Facebook from Google search, or we talk about application visibility across all 65,535 TCP and UDP ports, and being able to identify an application even if it's not running on its well-known port. And so we don't, like some vendors, we're not using URLs in order to identify an application. Like just because we see LinkedIn, we don't go, oh, that's LinkedIn, or it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So we look at the datagram on the packet that's traversing the device in order to understand what the application is. And we continually do that, right? So when a session starts, we don't just do app ID and then stop doing app ID. We do app ID for every packet that traverses the gateway. And so if the application does change, we understand that change in the application. So an example would be, someone visiting Facebook. Initially, there's an SSL request. The first application we see is SSL. And once the certificate is passed back to our gateway device, we'll understand from the certificate whether you want to decrypt Facebook or not, right? So we do a URL category match, and we understand that you want to decrypt it. If you want to decrypt it, the next session that we'll see from the client is a HTTP GET, right? And so now the application has gone SSL to HTTP. And so Facebook will send some information back. Once we see that application coming back, we'll read the datagrams and the packets that are coming back, and we'll understand it's Facebook. If your user subsequently clicks chat, we understand that it's Facebook chat, right? So we're continually running app ID. And one of the benefits of being able to do that is that app ID knowledge plays a part in the rest of the security services we run in our gateway box. So, for example, if you switch on our IPS engine, once you switch on IPS, it's always on. All signatures always fire against every packet, right? We don't have a concept of this signature pack will, blat your throughput, and so you can't use it. It's all IPS all the time, right? Mm. But what we do is when we're running the IPS signatures, say in the case where someone was accessing Facebook, and for whatever reason, an Oracle signature fired in the IPS, we wouldn't display that to the user because we know it's a false positive, because we know it's a Facebook application. And so we kind of auto-tune IPS for our customers, which means they get to switch on IPS very quickly. And it's moreover, there's more than that, right? There's file blocking. Like if an application doesn't have a capability for sharing files, we don't run our file blocking policy. And if an application, we don't run DLP engine, we don't run our DNS security tool against traffic that isn't DNS. But on the contrary, if we see DNS leaving your organization on UDP 123 for whatever reason, right, it's running over the well-known NTP port, we can provide DNS security controls on that UDP port because we recognize the application as opposed to being locked to port numbers and stuff. So we can be really, really intelligent there. So, but similarly, you could say like DNS shouldn't be happening on an NTP port. We don't want that, but maybe you do. So, and I think that's a differentiator for us, right? So when we built our next generation firewall, we built it from ground up to do everything, right? So we weren't starting with a product and then layering in acquisitions or partnerships or OEM. Well, we initially we had a partnership for URL filtering, right? But we moved away from that and we brought in our own URL filtering service. But so that our product has been built by us from the ground up to be natively integrated, which means that we can share information across all our security features very easily, right? And so things like, we have a sandboxing service called Wildfire. So if, predominantly the next generation firewall, it looks to identify what's known and prevent the bad stuff and allow the good stuff. And then anything that's unknown, flip that into something that's known, right? So unknown websites, we ask threat telemetry cloud. Unknown DNS entries, we ask the DNS service. Unknown files traversing your network, we ask Wildfire, which is a globally accessible sandbox that can do lots of great stuff for you. But when we detonate a file in Wildfire and we determine it to be malicious, we don't just send a signature for that file to your firewall or to all our customer firewalls and all endpoints from Palo Alto Networks, but we also capture all the telemetry from that file. So we detonate it in the sandbox. We might see a DNS entry, we might see a DNS request, we might see it connecting it to a website, we might see it pulling other files down. So we capture all the telemetry from the malicious file, and then we use that telemetry in order to update all the security engines on your gateway, but all of our customer gateways, right? So we block the URL, we block the DNS request, or sync all the DNS requests. We have an IPS SIG formulated for the C2 traffic, so we can block that even if the destination IP changes, which quite often it does if it's using DGA, domain generation algorithm. So I've gone completely off on the tangent. So
I'm just letting you're probably answering the majority of my questions that I have anyway. So I suppose like the main kind of I know we've talked about the kind of working from home and stuff. I suppose how do next generation firewalls specifically kind of, I suppose, support the working from home model opposed to the previous legacy firewalls, for example?
So I suppose there's a couple of ways, right? So the firewall or the gateway service can be deployed in multiple different types. So if we look at kind of what we spoke about up until now, so of course there's the user working from home, and so they may still need access to, services and applications that reside within your network. And so, with the firewall, with any of our firewalls, you get a free remote access client, right? VPN and remote access is all kind of coupled into that initial cost, right? And so you can configure that VPN client so it's always connected, right? So even to start before logon, so the user opens their laptop, we can create a tunnel to your next generation firewall if it's in your data center, at your perimeter, in your cloud, or wherever it is, right? So that VPN is connected. So when the Windows GNU comes up, or the logon screen comes up from a Mac, when they put in their username and password, they're actually logging into your network as if they were in the office, right? So there's kind of two different types of policies. There's a pre-logon policy and a post-logon policy. Pre-logon policy limits access. Once they log on, we do a second factor for authentication for them, and they get more access to your network, right? And that can be run, as I said, from your perimeter-based firewall. But if you've gone to the cloud, maybe you have a virtual firewall up there, and you can use that for a VPN gateway as well. So now they're connecting to your applications, and so when they connect to that firewall, all the services that are available for when your user is on site, so user ID, application ID, IPS, IDS, antivirus, all those applications that, when the user's in the office is protected by them, they're protected when they're at home as well. And so is their asset, right? So not only are they protected, but you have full accountability and visibility, right? So, and I think I kind of started to talk about this a few minutes ago and then went completely off tangent. But one of the nice things about having all that contextual information in a single place is that, if something ever did happen, and if an auditor came in to ask you some questions around specific timelines, you have the full context of all the sessions and flows that happen within your network during that context, right? So you have all that visibility, and you have it graphically as well as via logs if you want to go via logs. But you can pivot between them quite easily. So you can kind of build out what happened during those timelines from a graphical perspective, and then go to the logs and give those logs to that auditor, so they can review those in their own time. So the main thing is protecting assets, right? So the same security posture for your users, no matter where they are. So whether they come into your office and they're working at their desk, or whether they're at home and they're working from home, or if they're in a coffee shop, or if they're on another customer network, you always have the same kind of control over them, or control over them. Control for them. Control over them. They're always everything's being logged and monitored in order to secure that asset, right? And I think that kind of echoes why we've been late to market with a couple of things, and one of the things that we're bringing now, we have it available for a SaaS security service we do. We have it available for kind of our Prisma Access, or remote access at scale solution, but we're bringing a DLP blade, for lack of a better word, to our firewalls. So that DLP blade is actually cloud controlled. So our firewalls, whether they're physical or virtual, they don't do all the heavy lifting, right? So we very much at an early stage started using cloud services, our cloud services, in order to allow us to scale what's delivered by the gateway, right? So that started off with sandboxing, and then it moved to DNS, and now it's URL filtering. And so the firewall or the gateway just becomes a delivery mechanism for our security services, which are run in the cloud. And DLP is the same, right? So a lot of what we do is kind of we don't affect the performance of the box. We do that in the cloud somewhere else. So your box is processing traffic in a timely fashion.
Okay, and is that something, I suppose, that you're seeing clients adopting now? Are they starting to have that discussion a bit more freely? I suppose they're kind of don't have a decision, a lot of them, but is that something that you're seeing a rise in? Is the obviously we're all seeing a rise in move to cloud, but from a security perspective, especially from a firewall perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a maturity level, and we kind of saw it was kind of late last year, where we saw customers moving from a we will never go to cloud to going cloud first, right?
Yeah.
And then I think during COVID, we've seen like a sharp increase where customers are like, well, our policy is still not in cloud, but we need to secure all this cloud stuff. But that's, and that's just been, that's what has been delivered to them, and now it's become a pain point for them. But I certainly saw a lot of FSIs and a lot of government agencies kind of start to understand that, the people who are providing kind of cloud services, a lot of their business is based off that. And if something happens to that cloud service, that vendor will go out of business. So for us, for example, like if we had a massive breach in our sandboxing service where customers are sending us files that contain PII and PCI and stuff like that, we would go out of business tomorrow. So for a customer to say, I don't want to send you your files, they might not have as much, a financial burden put on them as we might on us, right? So it's hugely important that these are secured. And so I understand completely when a customer goes, I don't want to send files to your service because I can't guarantee the security of that service. But from our perspective, we're SOC 2 certified. Anywhere where we run our large data centers, we work quite closely with the data protection commissioner in that place, and we do provide customers with DOS reports and DDoS reports, the front page of that if they want under NDA. There's absolutely no problems there. But I think if we don't leverage the cloud for security services, that kind of scaling just doesn't work on-prem, right? So, when we talk about sandboxing, customers will send us every file that traverses their gateway. If it's unknown, it will be sent to us for analytics, right? And so in our analytics cloud, we virtualize, right? But we also have bare metal available, right? So if for whatever reason we're detonating a file on behalf of customer in our dynamic analysis cloud, it should do something, but it doesn't, right? So if it's an executable and the executable, we execute it and it just sits there and doesn't do anything. If the adversary probably fingerprinted our hypervisor, which is custom built, so very hard to do. But we have the ability to drop that file out of the virtual analysis environment onto bare metal and execute it there with an engineer looking at it, right? So you don't get a huge amount of stuff hitting bare metal, right? Because not many people are fingerprinting our hypervisors, so that's good news. But it does give people that increased protection against the very targeted attacks. I do think a lot of organizations might be in cloud and they don't know. So like we have a few customers and speaking to them, the whole deployment of apps, especially when you send the developers home, they might not have had access to the same resources they did when they were in the office because those resources were under their desks. And their under the desk environment isn't available across the VPN. So a lot of them that just took out their credit cards, their corporate cards, and started procuring cloud services in order to write applications. And then when the applications went into UA user acceptance testing, they went live, right? Because all the processes that were in place before to go from dev, UAT to prod all went out the window. So a lot of UAT environments are now prod environments. And they've been running clouds. And they'd be running clouds that are now have data in them, but they wouldn't have had data in them when they were being developed. So there is challenges for a lot of organizations to try get hold of, the extent of cloud that's being used within their organization. Because, surprise, surprise, not everyone phones IT security when they want to deploy a new application, right? So a different series of challenges for organizations.
And do you, I suppose, if a company is kind of looking at their, their security, I know we popped out a poll there, and 83% of people kind of said that they rely on their firewall as their main form of security. And, another kind of main one is that basically it's that pretty much 100% of people are that they're between really secure and secure to a certain extent. So I suppose for example, if I was, looking to increase my security posture, if I was looking to enhance it with the next generation firewall, I suppose what can Palo Alto? I know that you guys do some health checks, things like that. You also mentioned some of the kind of, I suppose you call it free stuff that you got put out at the start of this kind of pandemic and stuff. What can we? I suppose what can a customer get from Palo Alto that can help them out there?
So we do depending on a maturity level for a customer and I suppose what the challenge is that they're looking to face or the level of visibility that they want. I mean, everything that we do from native cloud security to compliance and monitoring for cloud, all the way through to endpoint security and next generation firewalls at the perimeter of your network. That's all available from a proof of concept value. Mm-hmm. When we do a proof of concept with the customer, we put them in the driving seat, right? So me or one of my peers, Alex or Keith, would work with the customer on what a proof of concept looks like or a proof of value looks like, because it's different, right? So like if you're talking about endpoint, it typically you're talking about testing for application compatibility, right? So it's not that you don't normally get 100 viruses a day on an endpoint. And so when you do an endpoint thing, we would normally simulate that with the customer with their golden image build. We'll build something offsite on DSL and we'll send loads of viruses to it to make sure that our antivirus technology is good. So for existing customers, we run through, there's a number of different tools we can use with them. One is a BPA tool, which is a best practice analysis tool, where we can ingest kind of their firewall config into a tool, and it will give us recommendations that we'll build little mini projects for the customer around doing. And so that could be, user ID adoption, security profile dissemination across your estate, and a number of different things from a best practice. Even just the kind of config on that box. Are you logging everything? Have you got full visibility? Are you doing SSL decryption? SSL decryption is a big blind spot for a lot of organizations. So we work with customers beyond the actual implementation of the firewall, right? It will, as I said, I think I said it at the start, it's not magical. You have to actually switch it on and configure it. Right? It's not black box technology, right? We need to tell it what our concerns are. And so I work with customers on an ongoing basis to help them, switch on these tools. And so one of the ways, if a customer is not using our technology, quite often what we'll do is we'll try to do a visibility report with them, where we'll take one of our boxes, or two of our boxes, or three of our boxes, or however many boxes are needed, and put them at each point of presence they have, either on their network or in their cloud, and send a copy of all the traffic that's traversing their network to that device. And then we can show them with their own traffic profiles what the device would do, right? We don't participate in the network, or at least we try not to. We do have POCs where customers go live, but we try to stay to the side as much as possible, right? We don't want to be, we don't want a finger pointed at us if something else breaks, because that's quite often what happens. So we try to stay as independent as possible, and we don't want to go through customers' change control and all that kind of stuff, because that's not good for them and it's not good for anyone, right? If we can be as silent as possible, but we'll give them a view of everything that's happening on their network from an app ID, user ID perspective, and we normally provide them with a report. And when there's elements of that report that spark an interest, then we'll normally leverage the telemetry on that unit on site in order to give them more insight into what's happening. And so if something bad was happening, like something was exfiltrating from the network, we don't just say, haha, something's exfiltrating from your network, buy stuff. We try to give them actionable threat intelligence throughout that period, so they can take a remediation action, right? So, and then we'll work with them on a weekly basis to make sure that that's remediated with their existing kit before we pull our box out, right? So ultimately they have a good experience either way, whether they buy it or they don't buy it. They have there's been a positive experience, and so that's another way we do it, and we call that a security lifecycle report. So we generate these nice, pretty reports that look really good in front of a board member, but then we take the data from that report and we get into the nitty-gritty of all the advanced logs that we do. And so that's one thing. And quite often what we're seeing now is we're seeing a lot of people looking to do automation. So we've an automation tool which is free for anyone to download. We acquired Demisto a while ago, and so that's another tool that people can deploy within their network, and they don't need us to do that, right? You can download a version for free. It's limited in terms of the amount of workflows that will run every day, but people can start to look at automating things, which I think is another one of the challenges from kind of this disconnected workforce is, services and how do we do services and how do we update things and stuff, and automation seems to be like one of the keys to success there,
Great. Okay. I think I've just seen a question about bring your own devices pop in there. So I just wanted to just quickly, I might just throw that in. So Peter was just asking, do you see bring your own devices as being a big risk area with remote workers, and how how is Palo Alto addressing this?
Yeah, so I can talk specifically about a customer I dealt with. So I maybe spent a month with the customer, kind of enabling them for remote access, and so they're multifaceted, right? So they've got everything from ICS and SCADA-based networks that are manufacturing things. They've a huge high-tech part of their organization. They have a very large administrative arm for billing and stuff like that. And then they've got a lot of developers. And a lot of the developers don't want to use the corporate build and want to use their own build. They just, instead of them using the Dell thing that you got me, they just bought this cool thing and it's running Linux, and that's what they don't want your tools, right? And so what we did is when everyone went home, we enabled them for remote access, and we gave them the agent. We posted the agent. So once they could multi-factor onto a website that was hosted by us, and they could pull the agent down, whether that was a Windows or a Mac or a Linux or an Android agent. And we had a policy that would then, once the agent was installed and the user authenticated to the service, we ran HIP. And I mentioned HIP earlier. So HIP is host information profiles. And so what that does is, because there's now an agent running on the device, we can do things like check to see if there's antivirus on there, if the firewall's enabled, if the desktop is encrypted, if there's a particular registry entry, if it's domain joined, if there's certificate. So we can check a myriad of different things, right? And so we did that, right? So we said, let's be nosy and let's check everyone who's connected. And we'll make sure that they also have the kind of the desktop management software on there, right? Which is a product called Tanium in this customer's case. And if they didn't have Tanium, we would restrict their access. So we go, you can't come in until you do Tanium. And so what Tanium did for this customer is it allowed them, if they discovered malicious content, to look across their entire network to see if these binaries were running anywhere else in their network or existed on any of the hard drives. And so they're a very targeted organization in terms of their intellectual property is really, really wanted out there. And so Tanium is critical to their security, right? So we leveraged the HIP profiles that you have in Global Protect in order to make sure that the desktops would install Tanium. Otherwise, we wouldn't give them access to do their job, right? If you don't have Tanium, you don't get access.
Yeah.
And so from a BYOD perspective, we said, look, if you want to use your own device, you do, but you have to install Tanium on it because we need to protect our assets. So that is kind of how we dealt with that. And so, that's for, I suppose, Linux, Windows, and Mac. So what about Android and iOS, I guess, is the question. So with Protect, again, you can limit things based on the operating system. And so you might have a policy that says, if you're using my asset and you're accessing the data that resides within our data center, you can do a job, right? So we give you full access, we'll monitor everything, we'll log everything. But if for some reason, I know, you're using an iPad or something when you're away or out of the office, we might only give you read-only access, so you can't upload files, you can't download files from web email. You only have access to these 5 applications or 1 application. Or you might just say, no access for you, you're not allowed to use that you're not allowed IoT. So I hope that helps, Peter. And there's a number of different ways. It depends on whether you want to enable it or disable it, right? Most people kind of look for somewhere in between. If my workers want to work from their own device, right? You want to do more work? Awesome.
Yeah, but you have to do it under these parameters, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, well, we still need to protect our data and our applications. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I suppose the last kind of main question is that's kind of come in there is how easy is it to roll out next generation firewalls? So I suppose what's the benefits of rolling it out? How easy is it to do?
So it is relatively easy. So the way it depends on again what you're looking to do with it. So in terms of, like, if we're looking at the physical firewall, there's a number of ways it can be deployed within a corporate environment. There's layer 3, which is what everyone knows and loves, which is a routed firewall. The root of last resort out of your network, it hits that box, traffic is processed and sent to the internet. There's layer 2, which is normally used for like insertion into data centers, but it can be used in typical LAN environments as well, where you would create a new VLAN. You might not necessarily want to change IP addressing. And there's like VRF deployment into organizations. There's also like layer 1.5 is kind of what I call it, which is called virtual wire, where we become a bump in the network. It's not layer 2, or layer 2 traffic traverses the firewall, but when the firewall sees traffic, it can pull it up and do layer 7 security on it, even to the point where it can NAT the traffic, which is a bit crazy, and change the routing of the traffic. So there's a number of different ways you can deploy it. And based on those ways of deploying it, you can kind of insert a next generation firewall into your network in order to have it learn about what's happening within your network before you remove your old firewall. We have a tool called Expedition. And Expedition is allows you to migrate kind of older firewall policies to next generation firewall. And so what we tend to tell customers to do when they're replacing an old firewall with us is the first part is that you take your firewall policy that exists on your on your existing box today, and that layer 4, layer 3, layer 4 policy with source IPs and destination IPs and ports and everything, all that stuff, you just put that on your Palo Alto Networks box. So verbatim, right? So you don't make any changes, you don't clean up any rules, any of that. You just bring that config over and you stick it on Palo Alto Networks box, a Palo Alto Networks box. And now you're processing traffic based on your security policy, right? Your security policy doesn't change. So just because we're processing the traffic based on that security policy, it doesn't mean that we're not still doing all the cool, groovy stuff that we do, like app ID, user ID, IPS, IDS, and so on and so forth, right? We can still do all that. And then what tends to happen is like we will go live with the new policy. And then after a week, there's a tool within the box called the Policy Optimizer tool that it will start to show you what applications it's discovered on these layer 3, layer 4 rules. So that old port-based rule that you had that said allow port 443 and port 80 for web stuff, it will come back and go, I found Facebook and SharePoint and Microsoft Office and Google and YouTube. It will come back and tell you the apps it's found. So at that point, we would normally work with the customer with starting to create app ID policies and slightly changing how they do things. So what tends to happen is if you've got, say, 100 rules, initially you'll go to like 200 rules, and then you'll go all the way down to like 50 or 30 rules, because app ID is kind of different to port-based rules, and you start to get, a different grouping of your rules, right? So you've got business apps versus, care apps, if you like, or the apps that are tolerable to your organization, which might be a bit of Gmail but no uploads, or a bit of Facebook with no chat, or whatever, right? So every organization is different. But and normally happens over a few months, but it's not a lot of work. Does that make sense? And so what you do is you allow the firewall to build up the intelligence, and then you log on a Friday or on a Monday morning, and you go, let me adopt these apps into a rule. So you have your old port-based rule here, and you do your app ID migration for those ports on the rule just above it. And so as you do so, what should happen is eventually this port-based rule should just have all the applications matching it that you don't want in your organization, like BitTorrent and BitMiner, and all the bad stuff should be on this rule, right? And then you delete that rule. And if for whatever reason you break things, you can just put that rule back in, right? It's slowly, surely, increasing your security posture, reducing your attack surface, but keeping the business running, right? It's not big bang. I always avoid these colossal changes. I'm a big fan of small incremental changes, because if you do all the changes all at once, you get to here and you go, oh, look at all these changes, we're amazing. Go live, something breaks, you're back to the very start, which is so just small incremental changes over time, and you end up in a really good place. But the main thing is that there is small incremental changes. There's a big pat on the back and round of applause when the box goes in, but that's only kind of the start of the journey, right? So turning on the security services is the second part, and then doing app ID and user ID migration is the third part.
Okay. Brilliant. We've just had a question come in, and it's very specific. So I'll quickly ask it, and then we'll wrap it up. So this is from John, and he's just asking. He understands that Wildfire sends. I understand that Wildfire sends to the cloud if it doesn't recognize a file for analysis, but does it still allow the file to run on the client while the analysis is taking place? We have 2 firewalls running in HA on-prem, and that was my understanding.
Yeah, so yes is the answer. So the firewall will, if a file is traversing the gateway and we haven't seen that file before, based on a policy that you define, that file could be uploaded to Wildfire, right? So it's not everything. It's not a global policy. You define what gets sent to us, but we don't store the file on the box. So we don't buffer anything. We're a packet-based service. We're not storing files. So the file will traverse the firewall and land on the client, and it will be sent to Wildfire for analysis. Analysis generally takes 5 minutes. All right, so from when we receive the file to when we have a verdict for the file is about 5 minutes. And so yes, if that is a malicious file, it will run on the client. Absolutely. But that file has to have never been seen across any of our customers ever before. If your client is running our endpoint security tool called Traps, or now XDR, that has zero-day capabilities for detonation of files on it. And so, we would say you're better together with the 2 products, but so more often than not, files are benign, right? It's, it's like 0.1% of files are malicious that traverse the gateway. And so if we were buffering files, we'd be slowing your business down. To buffer it in order to get analytics and send it. And there are some sandboxing vendors out there who will buffer files, and prevent them from being sent. And so we've replaced those vendors time and time again, just due to how they do things, right? So everything is localized. You make all the decisions. So Wildfire is a global threat analytics cloud with more than 70,000 customers connected to it, and every customer has an average of 6.5 firewalls, and I don't know how many millions of endpoints. And so when a file is traversing your gateway and hasn't been seen before, and it detonates on the endpoint, and I think I kind of mentioned this before. So one, we use fuzzy signatures for malicious content. So if a file is polymorphic, our fuzzy signature can detect variations on that file. But secondly, because we capture all the telemetry from submission to Wildfire, and we update your URL filtering, and we update your IPS signatures, and we update your DNS signature, when that file gets sent to that endpoint and it detonates on that endpoint, not only does it have to be completely unique, but also the adversary who wrote the malicious content has to be using completely unique back-end services for a successful attack to take place. And it does take about 5 minutes, for us to update our firewall. And you're right, an attack can spread very quickly in 5 minutes. And that's why a few years ago we kind of divested our strategy and invested in endpoint, because ultimately no one is targeting the perimeter of your network. Everyone is targeting what's behind that perimeter, which is endpoints and servers and applications. So you're dead right. We'll traverse the firewall until such a time that a verdict is returned to the firewall.
Okay, brilliant. I think we'll wrap it up, Dan. I would just like to thank you so much for joining us again. And John also said thanks. So I thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, Dan, for taking the time out to answer all my questions.
Thank you.
If anybody wants more information, I think there'll be an extra email sent out after this, so please contact us if you have any questions. Of course, reach out anywhere, and we will speak to you guys soon. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much.